Hey everybody, I'm sitting down with Kyle Higgins, the architect of the Massiverse. Today we're going to be talking about 3 of his books, Radiant Black, C.O.W.L, and No One. Kyle, it's a pleasure to be sitting down with you again.
Oh, thanks so much, Drake. Thanks for having me.
You know, it's funny, in preparation for this, I rewatched the interview that we did about your Power Rangers series, and you teased Radiant Black in it. So it's really interesting to now be talking to you with it becoming a huge indie success with the entire Massiverse spinning out of that. What has that been like?
A lot of work, if I'm being totally honest, but incredibly fulfilling, both creatively as well as, I don't know, like kind of purpose-wise, if that makes any sense. Mm-hmm. I spent a lot of years writing stories and playing in other people's sandboxes, and I love that. Like, it will never get boring to write Batman, for example, but at a certain point, I think some creators enjoy building for themselves and building with other collaborators, things that are new and things that they can own. And I will tell you, having built out this line with, some amazing partners, everyone from Marcelo Costa on Radiant Black and Eduardo Ferragato and Michael Basudel to Matt Groom and Erica D'Urso and Igor Monti on Inferno Girl Red and Ryan Parrott and Abel and Becca Carey and Natalia Marquez on Rogue Sun, Ryan Buccellato, Geraldo Borges, Mark Englert, Hassan on No One. There's nothing better than putting in an insane amount of work, time, and energy into building something that, again, it's like equity for us, because we all, we own these books and we're doing all of this together. So, I think for a long time, personally, as much as I love writing and love writing comic books, there are a lot of other things that I do and enjoy doing. And I think with the Massiverse, it's been a really fantastic opportunity for me to kind of stretch my wings a bit and get back to directing, voice directing, editing, video editing, motion graphics, a lot of these things that go beyond just writing comic books and that I've done for a lot of my life, those things kind of went by the wayside when I started writing for Marvel and DC, because I want to get really, really good at doing that and focus on just doing that. But I also know that there's so much more than just writing comics that I enjoy. And a lot of times on work for hire jobs, for example, it's like, I need to be just the writer. And I've had editors tell me that before, that it's like, you're doing too much. We need you to just write the book and don't worry about the art. Don't worry about the covers. Don't worry about anything else. And I get it, but that's not as fulfilling for me anymore. And so I think what the last 4 or 5 years now have done, what the last 4 or 5 years have done, really first and foremost, is just kind of like remind myself and reassure myself that that I am more than just writing other people's comic books.
Mm-hmm. But is it a lot of pressure? Because Radiant Black is the first of the Massiverse, and it's also the flagship title. Whenever people think about it, they think of Radiant Black. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure that there must be at least some amount of pressure, knowing that the eyes that are on Radiant Black are going to translate into eyes on the books of your friends and collaborators.
Yeah, I mean, that's the hope. And yes, definitely, there's definitely pressure. I feel it every day. There's the pressure creatively, but then there's also the pressure logistically, and making sure that we are this year back on time, on schedule, monthly, that we're consistent again, while also maintaining the level of quality, both in terms of storytelling, but also in terms of concept and in terms of surprises that we've kind of cultivated over the last 4 years, you can't lose any of that stuff because that's what makes the book the book. So really like performing and delivering at a high level consistently while also juggling a lot of other projects and responsibilities now. I think that's the biggest thing that's changed since we launched Radiant Black, is that by kicking off the Massiveverse, there's a lot more that I do now, as I was just alluding to, beyond just writing, a book, much less multiple books. Right before we jumped on this call, it's like I was in back-to-back meetings about everything from accounting to some legal stuff, So I have a marketing call after this. I have a trailer I have to cut tonight. I have a session I have to voice direct coming up for the Radiant Black audiobook. It's a lot. I'm not going to lie, but like I said, it's very creatively fulfilling. And since we are building all this stuff for ourselves, it's much easier to get, energized and kind of go all out than it would be when you're doing it for, someone else's property or another company's property, where, the success you might make on the property, that might not trickle back down to you as the creator.
Mm-hmm. This is actually something I was going to touch on much later in the interview, but since you brought it up now, do you worry about burning out? Because you were doing so much with this, because not just with Radiant Black and your other titles, but like No One, which we're going to get into later, it wasn't just a comic. It was a full-on multimedia experience. And it just seems like you have so many fires in the iron. How are you managing to keep the pace?
I'm less worried about burning out now than I was. I would say last year was really, really hard. Not just from a work standpoint, but I had another, significant knee surgery, so I wasn't walking for 6 or 8 weeks, something like that. It was my 6th significant knee surgery in 6 years, and each time it's harder to come back. So between that, like literally doing all of this on one leg, plus, as you alluded to, all of the intricacies of No One and the Catalyst War going on at the same time, in addition to, I don't know, four or five other projects that were also happening concurrently, and Moon Man, and then all the other Massiveverse stuff that I was creative directing. It was definitely a really tough year. And this year has already been markedly better. I've been able to I've been able to pull back a bit on some of the stuff that I do personally. We have a little bit more help, not much. It's still really just Michael Basuto and myself, doing all this stuff. But we do have some more help, and I have an incredible partner that, we live together, and she keeps me alive. She's been very, I would not be able to do this without her, without Kelly. So, I appreciate the concern. You're not the first person to verbalize or voice that, but I am doing okay. So.
That's legitimately a big relief to hear, because I was really worried. You had so much going on. And then also, I was reading the Supermassive, I believe, for 2023, and with the stinger at the end, with Spawn showing up, as much as I wanted to enjoy that moment, I actually kind of recoiled a little bit, because I was like, oh God, I hope this doesn't go the way of the Image shared universe, because like everything has been working in concert. And that is something I wanted to ask about is, the death of the Image shared universe was a death by 1,000 cuts. But do you worry about anybody taking their ball and going home, or is everybody locked in with the same idea and the same vision?
That's a great question. I'm not worried about that at all. These books are all owned by their respective creative teams, but no one's doing anything in a vacuum. And I would say the best part about supporting and enabling your friends and people that you believe in as creators is that when you find the right people, they give that back, tenfold. And so everyone who does a book with us in our line here is on the same page about what we're trying to do, the types of books we're trying to make, how we're trying to push the boundaries of the medium, as well as how much we are all better together than perhaps separated out, as individual entities. So for now, everything's good on that front. I would say that the biggest thing for this year, though, if you take a look at where the books are at, The Dead Lucky finished up her story for now last year. No One was 10 issues long, but as we're going to talk about, had a multitude of other components that go along with it from a storytelling standpoint. But that wrapped up. But from a book standpoint, it's just Radiant Black and Rogue Sun, and we want to create more consistency, not only with readers, but with retailers, as we're back on track and, firing on all cylinders again.
Okay. Well, let's hop into Radiant Black. So
yeah.
You made a very...
Do you hate it? That's the most important question, Trey.
Okay.
Despise it? Just awful?
I love it.
Did it sink your channel?
No, actually. It's funny because I did a name search, which I know you should never do. And one person was like, why is Radiant Black so popular? And somebody said, Comic Drake. I'm like, okay, my bad. Well, boy, howdy.
You know what? Honestly, though, I have gotten a not insignificant number of people approach me at conventions to tell me that they first heard of Radiant Black on this YouTube channel, and I said, was it Comic Drake? And they said, yeah, you know Comic Drake? And I was like, of course I know Comic Drake. I've done interviews with Comic Drake. We love Comic Drake. So you're not wrong, or that post is not. It's not entirely wrong here.
Well, thank you so much for that. I will always be Radiant Black's #1 champion. I pretty much only read digital comics. This library is exclusively to lend out to friends, and I have forced my copy of Radiant Black #1 is worn out because of how many people I forced it onto. And one of the reasons that why I'm so adamant about that is because of the emotional storytelling that you've done with it. Now, we're going to get to that in a moment, but you did a really bold swing right at the beginning of the series by swapping the main character from Nathan to Marshall. How did you manage to make that work? Because you could lose a lot of your audience on that by swapping out the character with a completely different personality.
Well, depending on who you talk to, we didn't make it work because I still hear from people who prefer Nathan as Radiant Black. But no, I mean, look, that was the plan from day one of the book. If you want to talk about, some of the influences on Radiant Black, sure, when you look at all the characters visually, there's certainly a Super Sentai aesthetic influence on their designs. But I would argue that from a story and a character standpoint, there's much more of a Kamen Rider influence on these characters than Super Sentai. In Kamen Rider, there is the secondary rider trope. And for those who don't know, in the original first season of Kamen Rider, the original rider broke his leg, I believe his femur in a motorcycle accident. And so as he had to leave the show and having surgery and recovering and everything else, they brought in a different actor as a new rider, a new Kamen Rider on the series. And then when the original actor healed up, he came back to the show. And so now you had two. And that kind of became a little bit of a... In the way that Sentai has the sixth, or Power Rangers has the sixth Ranger that tends to be added in to different teams. Kamen Rider and the secondary rider and all the riders all being more individuals rather than a team is something that was really interesting to me with Radiant Black. And so the book Radiant Black is really just it's secretly it's not a secret anymore. It's always been designed to be a two-hander. between these two disillusioned millennial best friends navigating their failed dreams and existential dread, and the ends of their well, I don't want to say ends, I guess. These two men of a certain generation realizing that what they were sold isn't necessarily what is reality for those of us. I'll be 40 this year, and I'll tell you, like, the world that I thought we were entering into at the turn of the century is very different than the world we are now currently living in. Mm-hmm. And I think there are a lot of people my age and younger and older as well who feel similarly. And so I felt like it was a risk, but if we did our job right and we could really dive into these two best friends and make sure that each one was wholly unique, and really build out the complexities of their dynamic and their relationship, that when we make that switch, it would be jarring, but hopefully it would people would go along for the ride to see how it was going to develop and turn out. And maybe they might just fall in love with Marshall in the process. I'll tell you, like, as the writer, though, I was worried actually writing the issues. I remember when we did it at issue 4 and we dropped the building on Nathan, I remember when I started writing issue 5, and it wasn't even so much 5, it was more 7, where I had this moment going like, shit, is this gonna work? Like, am I gonna be able to pull this off? Because I was concerned. Marshall's a great bit character. He's a great little agent of chaos, like as a side character to come in, or a supporting character. Yeah. But when it's now everything is his point of view, it's like, oh man, is it gonna get stale? Is it going to be too much? Like, am I going to be able to make people care about him in the way that, I felt like we were onto something with Nathan? And, without spoiling things for anyone who hasn't read the series yet, we do something at issue 24 and issue 25 that no one's really done in comics before. I mean, Jason Todd did a version of it for sure in the 80s, mm-hmm. which was a fan vote, whether Jason was going to live or die. But we did a fan vote for whether Nathan or Marshall would become the permanent Radiant Black. And it was a really interesting month or month and a half as we were collecting the votes, just watching the discourse. The book's not about me, but there's a lot of me in the book. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of me in Nathan. There's a lot of me in Marshall, or different aspects of me, I guess. And it was a little surreal watching people argue about which character sucked and which character was better. Sure. And to not take it personally or as any sort of judgment on aspects of myself was, totally the normal, healthy thing that I did.
Well, I did want to actually ask about that a bit later, but that was totally fan decided? You didn't put your hand on the scale one way or the other?
No.
Okay.
I mean, I felt very confident Marshall was going to win the vote. We all knew that, but it was quite close. So I don't think we've revealed the numbers yet. It's not a huge deal. I mean, Marshall won, but it was closer than you would think. Down to the last day, and we knew that Marshall was going to be he's a more. For a lot of readers, he's a more fun character. He's a more fun lead to follow. Mm-hmm. And knowing that is also why when we split the timelines, the Marshall timeline was under the A cover.
How have you evolved as a writer throughout this, especially because you keep consistently pushing the boundaries of what comics can be? I love the 4 timelines of Radiant Yellow, and when you guys decided to make that as the Infinite Edition, I love the way that Doppler as a character plays with the onomatopoeias and the visual art of comics. It really does seem like you have a love and respect for the comic book art form. Have you seen yourself finding new ways to approach this as you've been writing?
I'm going to use a music analogy. I was a trumpet player for many years, and one of the biggest problems I had as a trumpet player especially like playing jazz, improvising, things like that. What I can hear in my head, I couldn't get onto the horn. So it wasn't for lack of, not hearing it or lack of vision or anything like that. It was the translation down to my fingers and my embouchure and where I thought I was playing a note, like in a really high register, for example, and what I was actually playing weren't always, a match. And I think writing or any sort of art form is like that, where when you're starting out, the best version of the story is the version that's in your head that you haven't actually written yet, right? And that's what ends up being a hang up for a lot of aspiring creators who some never end up taking a swing. I feel like I got to a point a few years ago, finally, where what I hear in my head, I'm able to get onto the horn. The horn in this analogy is the script. It's the finished book. And that imbues you with a lot of confidence. Sometimes enough confidence to overcome that pesky imposter syndrome that we were talking about a little while ago. The second part of it is the we, which is the creative team on this book. We could not have been more fortunate with the collaborators and co-creators that we have put together on Radiant Black. And similar to Nathan's arc, in the Catalyst War, where it's really about him learning how to ask for help, I feel like I've had to go on that journey to some extent as well. And I knew with Radiant Black, I didn't want to be a bottleneck in the way that I might have been on some of my other projects in the past. And when I say bottleneck, what I mean is like all those other things that I'm interested in and I'm talking about. Sometimes, as a creative, you get excited about other things because you don't want to do the thing that you have to do that's sitting in front of you,
Yeah.
And writing scripts is not easy, and it's not fun. It can be very painful. Sometimes it's fun, but other times it just sucks. And there's a lot of anxiety in the process at times. And considering how many outside the box things we're trying to do on Radiant Black, as well as the other responsibilities I have as well, I knew at a certain point when I needed help. And so I called Joe Clark, who's one of my best friends. We grew up playing in jazz bands together. We wrote this Deep Cuts book together that was nominated for an Eisner this year. That was Joe's first comic.
That's awesome.
And Joe and I both grew up in Lockport, Illinois. Joe lives in Chicago. And it just so happens that he's, in addition to being an incredible composer, orchestrator, arranger, trumpet player in the city, he's a kick-ass comic book writer. And so if you notice, since Catalyst War, Joe had joined me a few other times on Radiant Black, but from Catalyst War to right now, we're recording this the day after issue 33 came out, Joe's a co-writer on the book with me.
And you see a lot of that parallel with Nathan and Marshall's relationship as well, which is awesome. It really does seem like you've grown as a person throughout the process of writing this book about collaboration and leading on one another and accepting oneself.
I hope so. I'd be doing something wrong if 5 years in, if I wasn't growing somehow, right?
Right. And I do want to apologize to the audience. Thank you for letting me get very self-indulgent and inside baseball with the Radiant Black questions. I'm a huge fan, so I'm glad that I get this opportunity. But I do want to talk about C.O.W.L and No One as well, and I know I only have you for a limited time. So let's move on over to C.O.W.L, because I know that this is kind of the comic that got you into the industry.
Yeah, so C.O.W.L is based on my college thesis film, which is called The League. It is a superhero noir about the superhero labor union of 1960s Chicago. It's like 30 minutes long. It's shot entirely on Super 16 millimeter film. There's tons of visual effects. There's tons of fight choreography and stunt doubles and costumes and wire work. And actually Joe Clark wrote an amazing original bebop score that he recorded in Chicago for the film. Yeah, I mean, it really did kick off my career. A friend of mine sent out an email to like 200 people, everyone he knew in film, TV, and comics. When I had finished the film, I had hired him to design the characters. Eric White was his name. And one of the first people that watched the film was Joe Quesada, and he reached out and we started emailing, and I ended up pitching to Marvel for about a year and a half, about, 15 to 20 stories I pitched, like fully broken, kind of like, outlines and stuff, before landing an issue of Captain America, a special one shot that Alec and I wrote together. And that then, that was my first comic book. And then that kicked off kind of everything else from there.
Well, what's it like integrating that into the Massiverse? Like, for one, you have instant world building and in history that goes back decades. But what was the motivation for bringing it in?
Well, I mean, I had the thought that we're going to set Radiant Black in Chicago and in the Chicago suburbs. C.O.W.L was also set in Chicago. Even when we announced Radiant Black in 2020, we had been planning to bring C.O.W.L back in some way, shape, or form, dating all the way back to 2015 when we ended the series at issue 11. So it was definitely something I had, it had crossed my mind, like, oh, is there a way that this could make sense? Like, are they in the same universe? Do we try to do that? And I actually felt initially like it didn't work, and maybe this is too self-indulgent, and maybe I don't need this, And so there were references early on in Radiant Black, little Easter eggs to C.O.W.L. I think in issue 2 there's a copy of C.O.W.L sitting on Nathan's like bedside table. I believe there's like a C.O.W.L poster in issue 3 with Marshall in the video rental store in the real world. No, that might be in issue 2 actually. But either way, by the time we got to issue 3, I knew we were actually going to be integrating C.O.W.L. And what happened behind the scenes was, actually it was Eric Stevenson, texted me one morning and said, "Hey, have you ever thought about it?" It wasn't about C.O.W.L, it was about a different book. He's like, "Hey, have you thought about connecting this in with Radiant Black?" And I was like, I hadn't. I said, "Do you think that's a good idea?" And he's like, "I think that it would be cool." And I said, "Well, it's funny you say that." I said, in the same spirit, I said, "Well, what would you think of connecting in C.O.W.L because of, X, Y, and Z?" And he's like, "I think that would be even cooler." And then that got my wheels kind of turning about like, okay, if we were to connect it, how would we connect it? We already knew we were doing Rogue Sun and Inferno Girl Red for the Massiverse. So we knew, publicly no one knew that yet, but we had been talking about that since before issue 1 of Radiant Black came out. And so it was like, okay, well, it makes sense. We could do it as a universe here, but I've had these, we have a comic book in issue 2 sitting there on the bedside table. Like, there's clearly already comics and like a movie in universe that was made. And so then my thought was, oh, well, sure. But all those adaptations could be things that Nathan and Marshall are fans of. C.O.W.L could stand in for Nathan and Marshall's love of C.O.W.L could stand in for my love of like the Sam Raimi Spider-Man films and the first 2 X-Men films, like the stuff from the late 90s and early 2000s that as a teenager, it's like I was picking up Wizard looking at their X-Men fan casting, and just like dreaming of the day of like getting an X-Men movie. And so C.O.W.L ended up becoming my way into exploring in the book, not just a really contemporary superhero story, but a story that celebrates being a fan of superheroes, which is really personal for me and for a lot of my collaborators because we love this material, it's why we do what we do. So it ended up becoming a cool situation where we got to kind of have our cake and eat it too. So the events of the book that we published in 2014 and 2015, those events actually happened in the universe, in the Massiverse. but then there were probably some fictional adaptations that happened in the early 2000s. And so we were able to kind of have it both ways.
That's a lot of fun. Well, C.O.W.L explores obviously union, since it is a superhero union, but also corruption and apathy. So what were you trying to explore by framing superheroes as these working class people?
Well, there's a few things going on with C.O.W.L. The first thing was that we were always interested in exploring superheroes through our version of the transition from the golden age to the silver age of comics. And when you look at the golden age of superhero comics, you're looking at Superman, you're looking at Batman, you're looking at Wonder Woman, like you're looking at the kind of flawless titans, to use a Greek analogy, who we the people could never be, but we would look up to because we're, you want someone in that position of power to be able to save you, right? Whereas the Marvel universe of the 1960s, all of these characters are kind of like, they are the flawed gods that descend from the Titans, but they are the gods built on faults, on very relatable qualities. And when you think of the comic book industry, the history of the comic book industry in that way, when you look at C.O.W.L, the idea is essentially a golden age hero, Jeffrey Warner, who's now too old to still be that Grey Raven hero for Chicago, now runs the labor union from behind a desk. And as the world is changing and the next generation, not only of heroes, but of villains, of threats in the city, just the dynamics in Chicago, much less the country in 1962, everything's starting to change. And so this golden age hero is trying to stay relevant and is definitely prioritizing self-preservation for not only the organization, but also himself, at the expense of the very ideals that the organization and the superheroes are founded on. And to me and to Alec, the thing that we always talked about as we were building the book was that we really wanted to explore the corruption and degradation of American institutions in that way. And that at a certain point, an organization or an institution gets to a certain scale where self-preservation does become more important than perhaps the ideology that the organization was started in the spirit of or because of. And I think that is just a quintessentially American downfall. And we see it all the time. We're seeing it right now in our world. C.O.W.L was kind of the beginnings of that for us, but again, through the 1960s lens and the corruption of an American institution. The C.O.W.L 1964 series takes that idea and it's ramping it up quite a bit more. It's also going to land things for C.O.W.L in a way that Massiverse fans and readers will start to be able to see, oh, this is actually how C.O.W.L connects in throughout the generations, throughout the decades. And it's in an unexpected way. And it's not huge. They're little things, but eagle-eyed readers will start to pick up that connective tissue and how it's going to factor into the future of the Massiverse as we move forward.
See, one of the things that I absolutely love about interviewing you is that you are able to predict the next 3 questions and tie them into answers that you're already given. So honestly, that covered pretty much everything that I wanted to ask about C.O.W.L. Like, you might think that your answers are long-winded, but they are A+. So
thanks, man.
In a similar vein to C.O.W.L, No One is a grounded mystery, and it's very much a political thriller because even though the main character and the name of the book is No One, he only really makes a handful of appearances. You're more focusing on talking heads and police officers. What was the motivation behind focusing more on them than the title vigilante?
Well, it was that's more of a feature than a bug for us. That was actually part of the dynamic that was most interesting to Brian Buccellato and myself when we started building this, which was like, imagine having, Batman in your universe, but no one knows his identity, not even the readers. And that felt like a really compelling way to do our version of an urban vigilante. The other thing about No One is that we felt like it would be a really great way to take the spirit of what we were trying to do with our other Massiverse titles and really kind of crank it to 11. It's a concept that lended itself to storytelling in multiple mediums concurrently. I think that was the way that really kind of cracked it for us. I don't know if you've seen me talk about it before, but it was originally a book that started as a Batman project I was doing at DC with Tim Sale, the late, great Tim Sale. It didn't end up happening at DC for a variety of reasons. And then a few years later, Tim passed away. There was something in the concept, though, that I always came back to that was really interesting to me. Now, it's quite a bit different than what we were exploring as the DC version. And the DC version was it was a pitch called Gordon and Son, and it was like Hannibal in Gotham City with Commissioner Gordon and his serial killer son James Jr. solving cold case murders together. But these are murders that Gordon actually thinks James Jr. committed early on in his career, and this is his way of getting James Jr. to hopefully confess, because Gordon, who's trying to get back in touch with Gotham and the reasons he became kind of a cop in the first place. I say Gotham, I mean like the people of Gotham, not the larger scope of it all. If there's no hope of saving his son, or at least getting his son to atone for what he's done, then what hope does Gordon have for anyone else in the city? Is kind of what's going on under the surface for him. With No One, like I said, it's very, very different from that, but that core component of a father dealing with the actions of his son is pretty central to the book still. We were trying to figure out a way to do it, to do something contemporary set in the Massiverse. And I remember there was a moment it was at a coffee shop. I was working in my notebook, and I had that idea of doing a true crime scripted audio series as an in-universe podcast for the murder mystery of it all, of the book. And when I kind of had that idea, that's what really unlocked everything for us. And so, yeah, for those that don't know, we do every issue of No One also had an accompanying companion podcast with Rachel Lee Cook and Patton Oswalt voicing the two reporters from the book, who are talked into starting said podcast like a Sarah Koenig serial kind of thing, chronicling their investigation. And then we had just a Murderers Row voice cast join us for this. So Todd Stashwick from Star Trek Picard, Yuri Lowenthal from the Spider-Man games, and Tara Platt, Christina V, Walter Jones from Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. It was an absolute blast, and I was able to direct, each episode. Brian and I wrote it all ourselves as well as the book, so there is a cohesion that goes like that between the audio series and the comic. And then all of the in-universe websites, newspaper articles, videos, data drops, we made all those as well. So the trade paperback actually has 35 QR codes in it. So if you want to experience the entire story, it's all right there for you. If you only want to read the book, you will still get an entire complete narrative that way. But you may want to go the extra mile, because at the end of it all, there's a QR code to a live action trailer that we released announcing that the story is continuing in a feature film that Brian and I are writing and that I'm directing.
The comic and the podcast are both definitely experiences that you can consume by themselves. But one thing that I do find interesting is that there are conversations that happen in the podcast that are then referenced in the comic and vice versa. What was it like trying to balance what gets revealed and said where?
Well, yeah, I mean, that is exactly it. It's a balancing act. And Brian and I really took that to heart. It was important to us that, as you just said, each experience could be had without the other. But if you were to listen to the podcast and read the book, the totality of them both together gives you new context, and it deepens and strengthens the story in general. But you just have to make some tough choices as far as whether you're hitting readers or listeners over the head with something. And if you are, because you're concerned that, if someone didn't listen to the podcast, they're not going to understand the story point in the comic. So it's like, okay, do we hit this information a little harder here in the comic, for example, and run the risk of it feeling like we're beating you over the head with it? Or do we just accept that some of this information you're not going to get unless you listen to the podcast, And it's a case-by-case basis. But I think Brian and I are both really, we're really cognizant of the reading experience and just the storytelling experience in general, because we both work in multiple mediums as creators. So it wasn't actually too tricky. I mean, the whole thing was tricky, but that aspect wasn't too tricky. We had a pretty good gauge for it. But we did send the first issue to friends, and there was a friend of ours who did read it and had that kind of reaction about, well, this doesn't make sense. It's like, well, but that's in episode 1, and which of those are we okay with letting hang like that, and which of them do we want to tie up and make it clear to readers only, like, exactly what is happening.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned the reading experience, because this is unlike pretty much anything else in comics, the fact that you're having to ping pong back and forth between these two mediums. Now, I'm going to totally admit I didn't read it week to week because I am a trade waiter. I'd like to sit and binge stuff. I will say that the vibe, it's not that my vibe was hampered because I'd read an issue and then listen to a 30-minute podcast and then back and forth. But normally, whenever I am ready to sit and binge a comic, I knock that out in about half an hour to an hour. And then sometimes these podcasts are taking as long as it would take me to read the entire book. And I'm sure that it was great on a week-to-week basis, but I can't imagine that there are going to be some people that are going to find that to be a little bit jarring, because it's not what they're expecting. When they buy a trade, they're expecting to read through it. Did you have an idea that was going to be something that people were going to experience and make it still digestible to people that are experiencing it as a binge format?
Yeah, I actually think that the trade is the best way to experience it. It more so than the monthly releases.
Really?
Yeah. And part of it is that we were able to dial in how exactly to lay out this information to readers by the time we got to the trade. The first couple issues of the comic, I would say the first half of the comic run, anytime I did a signing at a convention or at a store, anyone who brought up a copy of No One, any of the monthly issues, I would say that about half of those people had no idea there was an audio series. And the other half that did know there was an audio series, I'd say half of them had not listened to it. So there was a lost in translation aspect to what we were doing, especially early on. And that's in part because no one's really done this before. So there is an aspect of needing to, teach your readers how to engage with a piece of material. But the other aspect of it was, we were being cute. We were running in-universe ads for, the podcast at the end of each issue. And instead, we found we have to beat people over the head with the fact that no, you want to scan this QR code. This is actually a real thing. This isn't a fake ad, you know. And we started putting the cast list on, you know, the ad for the corresponding podcast episode, and then numbers started to tick up. We could see it on the podcast. By the time we got to the trade paperback, not only refining the order of both the podcast as well as all of the supplemental material, but also the messaging at the top of the book. Like if you look at page 1, literally page 1 of the trade paperback, it tells you no one is an interactive story. You're intended to scan QR codes, listen to audio episodes, read newspaper articles. Like you can go as far down that rabbit hole as you want. At the same time, getting someone to scan a QR code in a book, in general, you're not going to get a 100% conversion rate on that. You're just not going to get every reader to do that. It's kind of like when you're doing something on YouTube or on social and it requires, you know, 2 levels of click through. Like your conversion rate is just going to be much lower as a result.
Oh yeah.
And so we were factoring that into our storytelling choices as well, which is going back to, let's make sure that all of this is parsed out in a way and modular so that if someone wants to read that trade and not scan the QR code to read the newspaper article, you know, for example, here, it's like, is that newspaper article really necessary? If it's really necessary, then we're going to print it in the book, or at least sections of it in the book, so that readers are more likely to, if not read it, at least, you know, skim it. If it's something that is additive, but maybe not as narratively necessary, then we're fine running it as a QR code, right? Mm-hmm. But even separate of that, I think if you were to just read the comic, even in trade, without listening to the audio episodes, I do think you get an entire satisfying narrative.
That's fair. Are you familiar with ARGs?
Yes.
Okay, that makes sense because like the entire thing very much gives me ARG vibes. Fans of the channel know that I got my start on this YouTube channel called Game Theory, which one of the big things is that we covered a lot of ARGs. Do you have any
Which
favorites?
ones did you cover?
Okay, like right now I know they're doing this one called Welcome Home, which is about this like haunted 80s cartoon that's been wiped off the web, and like the website itself is like a living organism. I think they did some references to I Love Bees, the Halo one that was real popular.
Oh,
yeah. So did you participate in any ARGs? Did any of that Did any of that cause inspiration for the No One experience?
Well, I have to be careful what I say because there's NDAs, but I ran an ARG on a very, very prominent one that I can't ever publicly acknowledge.
Okay.
So yes,
noted.
yeah, I love ARGs. Definitely an influence on No One. Some of what I learned running said ARG, actually a lot of what I learned there was very influential, not only on how we approached No One and building our ARG for it, but also in my own process and my own kind of growth. It's however many years ago, because I won't even tell you what year, because then you could figure it out.
Sure.
But however many years ago it was, when I was running it, I was running it while also writing some really big comics, like monthly books and stuff.
Yeah, I won't put the dots together on camera.
But it was an experience that I remember one night I solved something after hours and I sent it to some of the powers that be, and the response was overwhelmingly glowing. And I remember going to bed that night, and I felt a level of fulfillment, I guess, pride, peace more than anything, because it just reminded me that no, I can do this stuff. Like I'm with no disrespect to my comics career, because I love it, but I am more than that. Like I can do more than that. And it, considering all I've wanted to do my whole life is direct movies, as much as I love my career doing comics, I had a complicated relationship with that career for a long time, because I felt like I was doing it at the expense of the stuff that I really wanted to be doing and wasn't doing for a variety of reasons, despite having opportunities that I couldn't capitalize on. And a lot of it was fear. A lot of it was being my own bottleneck. And this particular experience that I'm alluding to was at a very, very high level. And it was the first time where I felt like, I shouldn't say the first, it was the first time in a long time where I felt like, I'm in the right place.
So one of the core themes about No One is the idea of public perception and how the media portrays that and shapes it. Did you have any particular inspiration for that through line?
I wouldn't say I wouldn't cite anything specifically, but yes, I mean, I think what you just said is that's just it's just a factor in our day-to-day lives now, and the way media has changed in the last 20 years is significant. Everything's changed since the internet, certainly.
Oh, yeah.
I understand why things are the way they are. Doesn't mean I necessarily love them. The other component that we wanted to really explore and touch on, and we'll be doing a lot more with in the film, is this kind of like true crime docu-series industrial complex that we somehow have now. And the idea that like the true crime documentary has become like a genre unto itself, often I would argue leaning on some of that sensationalism, is fascinating to me. And it's definitely something that was interesting to us to try to cover or touch on with No One. And we do that by way of like PL Media, which is the new media division of the struggling Pittsburgh Ledger newspaper, and the events in Pittsburgh involving No One and the accountability killing movement turn into a little bit of a ratings bonanza for the paper. And the new media division then, understandably, in this kind of late stage capitalist society, want to capitalize on that. And so launching a true crime podcast feels like a no-brainer to them. But where that goes and some of the choices they make and some of the corners that they cut, I think is part of what we wanted to talk about, I guess, in the making of the book. And like I said, it's stuff that features quite a bit more prominently in the film.
That makes a lot of sense. But something that I do find fascinating, though, is that, like you said, the media landscape has changed a whole heck of a lot in the meantime. But it does seem that you're mostly focusing on legacy media during all of this. In fact, the only digital publication that I can think of off the top of my head from the book was in passing that you've had some reactionary channels. So why focus more on legacy media for this?
I think because legacy media is in such a unique and interesting position right now. It's demonized by so many. It's wrongly, in my opinion, in a lot of cases. But also, I understand, and I don't know that a lot of legacy media has made choices that mitigate that. I am fascinated by stories where you're putting people in pressure cookers. Mm-hmm. And I feel like the larger media landscape is very much in a pressure cooker right now, even separate of like what we're exploring genre-wise in No One. But when you look at the ways that legacy media, which I would say by and large most people trusted for many, many years, the position that legacy media is in is one of trying to generate revenue, consistent revenue, mm-hmm. in a way that wasn't a challenge in the same way 30, 40 years ago. I think as a result, you know, when you look at things like cable news and the rise of the 24-hour news cycle in the 90s, around the time of not only OJ, but Tanya Harding and things like that, it's been a slippery slope towards sensationalism. Sensationalism that is necessitated by a diminishing return based on the changing formats that people consume their news and entertainment through. And then you look at things like what Netflix has done and how it's disrupted in a very bad way what was a model that made everybody money in entertainment, between theatrical but more significantly cable and syndication and things like that. And I think when you consider all that stuff and then you look at the news media complex in No One, I felt like legacy media in the case of No One was interesting to explore because you could see how they sell their soul. Some of these characters in the book, how they sell their soul for ratings, in a way that I don't know has quite the same impact if it's more like creator content media. It's a little bit different, you know. There's surely there's plenty of sensationalism on that side as well, of course.
Oh, absolutely.
But it's different when it's ABC or CNN or, you know, the Pittsburgh Ledger or the Washington Post or any of these papers.
Yeah, there's not that pedigree.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I know that I don't have a whole lot more of your time, so I've got one quick question about the ending of No One, and then we'll move on to some viewer questions.
Yeah.
So
let's do it.
Obviously, the movie is coming out. Is there anything that you can talk about that? This is going to be... I don't want to spoil the book because the mystery is the entire bit, but you left things a little ambiguous. Is the movie going to be able to be standalone for people that haven't gone into the whole multimedia experience of No One? And do you think it's going to be a solid conclusion for people that still have questions about the end of your book?
Yes and yes. We are designing the movie so that it is accessible to anyone who hasn't read the book or listened to the podcast or any of that. Keep in mind that the film is being designed as a documentary. Mm-hmm. So it's going to be both adapting and covering the events of the comic and audio series and ARG, but it's also going to be continuing the story as well. So it creates one big multi-narrative where everything kind of sits like this. And, you know, I can't officially confirm this, but the intention is for everyone who voices the characters on the audio series to play them in front of camera for the seated interviews as well, so we can maintain that level of really tight immersion. Because of that format, it allows us to cover things for the first time for people, but also in a completely different way for anyone who has already read the book. And then as far as like a conclusion and answers, yes. Okay. Not only yes, but want to put this. We are playing with, probably to no surprise, we are playing with the format of the feature film in the same way that we play with the format of comic books, as we try to kind of push the boundaries on the medium and the storytelling experience itself. So that same spirit is being put forward with regards to the No One movie as well. And I can't say anything more than that, otherwise my partners will kill me.
I understand. Dude, I'm sold. Like, the way that you guys have been experimenting with the comic book medium, if you think you can bring that same approach to movies, that's very exciting. But
we've got something in particular on it that is pretty cool and pretty different. It's so different that, again, no one's done it before.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like the movie is going to be the definitive way to experience No One, especially if you're tying in all of the elements together into one big package.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that's the goal for Brian and myself and everyone that worked on not only the book but the movie. And our producer on the film, I mean, we have a few, but one of our main ones is Steven Schneider, who produced the Paranormal Activity films, the Insidious films, Late Night with the Devil, Blair Witch. Like, he comes out of that found footage feature and horror feature realm. No One's not a horror film, but it's very unconventional, and it definitely has more in common with a found footage feature than a traditional feature, even though it's found footage, but it's as a documentary, right?
Yeah.
And pushing the boundaries is something that Steven likes almost as much as we do. So
okay, well, that's really exciting.
Be a good time.
Well, you down for a quick lightning round of some viewer questions?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, this first one comes from a friend of ours, Chris over at Comic Tropes. I'm surprised that
don't know who that is. God,
I'm surprised.
What a name! Comic Tropes. What is that? What is that? Is that are there tropes in comics? What, I don't
think so. Maybe. Well, I'm surprised he didn't ask you this whenever he was, writing for Radiant Black, but he wants to know why black instead of any other color. He says he's serious. Was there any reason?
Well, there's a few reasons. In Universe, Marshall goes on a great anecdote in issue 3 about trying to come up with a name for Nathan, and when he pitches him Radiant Black, Nathan immediately counters with, like, but my powers are blue.
Yeah.
And he's like, yeah, but it's not a blue hole. Like, and black's elegant. It's sexy. It's timeless. You can use it. It's great. Black is the answer, right? The real reason is because it's somewhere in between the two. Like, we knew we were playing with miniature black holes and the iconography of black holes, so the idea of the character being named after a black hole, I liked. But also, I liked the almost kind of like contradiction of black being like the absence of light being radiant, which is the emission of light. And it's like, well, those don't really go together, but that's what makes it great. Like, that contrast and that juxtaposition and contradiction I really like. And then I backed that into the joke about the black holes and blue powers and things like that.
Exaggerated Swagger wants me to yell this at you.
Great name.
It's in all caps. When will the first 2 trades stop being out of print?
Well, I'm sitting here looking at giant boxes in my living room of copies of the new printing of Radiant Black Volume 1 and Volume 2. So the answer is literally right now.
Good.
And also, they weren't out of print for very long. This is our 4th printing on Radiant Black Volume 1, and either our 2nd or 3rd printing on Volume 2.
That's awesome. That's a great problem to have.
Yeah, it's good. It's good.
This one from Boston CEO. Will Nathan and Marshall be in-game?
Will they be what?
In-game. Are they going to end up together and kiss a little?
Oh, I thought you meant, are they going to be... in those like cool cast chairs for the Doomsday movie. Like,
no. They ship them.
I mean, you got to keep reading, but I mean, I don't want to like step on anyone's dreams, but that's not the plan right now. So no,
that's fair. That's fair. Della Ross says that it might be an awkward ask, but wants to know.
Love that.
Do you think that the big two comics or other shared universes could learn from the success of Massiverse? Are there any lessons that you wish the industry would take to heart?
I guess what I would say is that they are, as a creator, they're different muscles to really be, stretching, and if you do things right, hopefully, flexing. Mm-hmm. Working in other sandboxes versus building your own. I think what's a real challenge for the big two is not something that they can really overcome or easily overcome, which is just that, that illusion of change and the fact that things can't ever really progress in meaningful, sustainable ways. It limits the types of stories you can really do and how far you can push things and how far characters are allowed to grow and evolve. And when I say limits, that's not to say that like they don't have options. It just means the options are a little more limited than what we're able to do, say, in Radiant Black, where our characters are aging in real time to some extent. When we do something, it's going to stick. It matters. We're not going to undo it, he says, after killing Nathan, and one issue later, it turns out he's actually in a coma. But he was dead for those, 3 minutes.
Yeah.
But I think you would probably understand the spirit of what I mean here. People read Big Two comics for a lot of different reasons. For me as a fan, not a creator, at a certain point, I realized that they weren't really for me anymore. And that's okay. There are younger readers that are finding this material and these characters at the Big Two for the first time, whereas I feel like I just feel the churn more at this age than I did when I'll be 40 this year. When I was 15, to 20, it's like everything feels important. Everything narratively feels like it's really going to matter and it's going to change things forever. And then things ultimately get set back to the way they were. Mm-hmm. And once you go through that experience a few times as a reader and a fan, I do think for some of us, it changes what you're looking for in a story and in characters. It is funny though, because I did hear kind of through the grapevine that some editors at the Big Two had read Radiant Black #1. I don't know how long ago at this point, but as a part of a book club within kind of editorial. I didn't realize
that they had little book clubs. That's adorable.
Yeah, one of the interns brought in the first issue because they were really, really into the Massiverse stuff, and so they all read it kind of collectively and then talked about it, what worked, what didn't work, what they liked, what they didn't like. And I did hear that talking about the first page of issue 1, where it's the splash page of the phone screen and the $38 in a checking account and $48 in a checking account and $38,000 of credit card debt, and it's basically a splash page of a phone screen and the word balloon. I'm sorry, Mr. Burnett, but unfortunately your loan application has been denied. And I was told that we're talking about this person was talking about how much they loved that and how it encapsulated everything and puts you in his shoes, and it's a really kind of gut punch first page. And some of the editors said, yeah, I would never let a writer do that. and I kind of chuckled when they told me, and it's just I get it, but also that's why it works. Like what you said, the person telling me this, and how it does put you into the character's shoes in that way is why it works. And as much fun as it is to open a book with Wolverine slicing Sabretooth or Batman punching the Joker in a big splash page, as much fun as those splash pages are, those beats are, I've written a lot of them. I love them. Love a good splash page of Batman punching the Joker, right? The emotional impact of that is like a drop in the bucket compared with if you can put a reader into this existentially terrifying place about their own finances. That maybe that sounds stupid. Maybe that sounds like I don't want to read a comic like that. But then it comes down to like, well, what is the craft being put into making it and making that moment work and hopefully land, you know? And so that kind of stuff to me is like, I think there's lessons there in terms of how to tell stories that resonate with people and hopefully modern audiences. And I do think there's some stuff we do that, you know, might be applicable at the big two. I also think they need to stop renumbering, just like straight up, like just stop, please, just stop. You have broken it. You have broken your mechanism, and this goes beyond big two. By the way, you know, I can't tell you how many times Ryan Parrott and I will be at a convention, and you know, Power Rangers fan will come up and ask us, where do I start in terms of reading the comic books? Because, you know, at a certain point, Boom broke the book from Mighty Morphin Power Rangers into Mighty Morphin and Power Rangers with new number ones, and then did the same thing on the trade paperbacks and then the hardcovers. And so suddenly you don't quite know what mattered or what comes where unless you're doing a deep dive online. And I would, you know, you take that and then you extrapolate out with Marvel and extrapolate out with DC, and you can only go to that well of the new number one so many times before it is tapped dry. And it feels very tapped dry now. So much so that whatever short-term boost you're getting out of that new number one, I feel like you're losing by the third issue, because and your long-term, like, it completely screws the illusion of continuity and of like things mattering and stories marching forward. But what we were talking about, to bring it all back around before, about the squeeze on legacy media, I understand it, because comics don't sell what they sold in the 80s. They don't sell what they sold in the 90s. They don't even sell what they sold in the early 2000s. So where are you making money as a publisher? How are you getting people to come back? How are you getting people to try your books? You know, it's a really, really tricky challenge. I mean, we just went through this with Radiant Black, coming back with issue 31, which kicked off our rebuild era. We went through a month and a half of work behind the scenes to get the word out. Not only about, you know, the book, we're back, we're on time, we're monthly, but with retailers. I did like 20 or 30 retailer calls before FOC, walking them, retailers, through, here's what we're doing, here's what it's going to look like, here's what's coming. I shipped out boxes myself to the top, you know, like 15 or 20 like accounts, like with stacks of trade paperbacks signed by me, signed by Ryan Parrott, like bookmarks, pin sets, like the whole 9 yards, like, all because getting readers, much less retailers, to take a shot on a book in the 30s is incredibly hard right now. So I get, I mean, go to the comic store. I've said this on a ton of interviews recently, but like, how many books are above issue number 30, numbering wise, in comic stores right now? Like, I am genuinely curious. I don't think it's very many.
No, not a lot.
So I don't know. There's a lot. How much more time do we have? There's a lot. No, we'll leave it there.
No, I know that you and I are both big fans of Invincible, but when I first got into it, it was probably like 13 trades deep. I don't even know what number it was. It was like even like way past the blue suit era, and I had just gotten into comic books, and I had built a rapport with my guy at the local comic shop, and he's like, "Hey, I think I understand what books you like now. Have you heard of this little book called Invincible?" And that sold me, because the retailers and getting them on board, the personal relationships they build with their customers is what makes or breaks an indie series, in my opinion. And I remember I felt a little in the know, because my local comic shop, it didn't survive the pandemic, unfortunately. But they were like, "Oh man, this new book coming out, it's called Radiant Black." And I'm like, "Yeah, I read the first issue already, because Kyle sent it to me, and it's great." Oh. But they were hyping it up to everybody, because like all of them were big fans of Rangers, and they really got the word out. I really do think that a lot of people don't give just the average workers at a comic shop enough credit.
Oh, for sure. I mean, that's who has their finger on the pulse of not only what customers are into, but what creators and publishers are putting out. I mean, it's a really, really challenging time in the industry right now there's way too many books. There's way too many really good books. But there's also way too many books that there's not much of a demand for. And that is no fault of the creators. That is no fault of, and that is not a judgment on the quality of the book either. It's just when you see what is selling, what sells and what doesn't sell, there's just so much material, and it's such a crowded landscape and shelf space. As a retailer, trying to keep track of everything going on is incredibly challenging. And now, obviously, with all of the changes and the upheaval on the distribution side of things, it's like there are even, there are a lot of struggles there, and have been for several years now. I am cautiously optimistic, though, as we move forward here, that things might get a little better in some regards. It's going to be challenging in others, but yeah, it's just a really interesting time to be making comics in the direct market.
Yeah. Well, last question comes from Dabo. We know the Radiants are heavily inspired by Power Rangers, but we haven't seen the extra Secret Ranger trope yet. Is there any chance that Nathan's going to come back as another Radiant, like Radiant Silver or even Green, but that might be a bit on the nose?
No, he won't. There are no, I can tell you, there are no other Radiants out there. Like, I'm not.
Yeah, I didn't think so, based on the Catalyst.
Yeah. There's the 4 plus Premier. And that's it. Now the Premier Radiant is out there. It's with Accretion as well as the Vessel. What's going to happen there? You're going to have to keep reading. We do have a plan. We know what we're doing through issue 50 right now.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And then I have plans for beyond that. Like, I know what the shape beyond that is, but
That's
we
awesome.
actually know up through about issue 50. Yeah.
Okay.
So, stay tuned. Yeah. But
Okay.
no, we're not. And as I said earlier, like, I think there's more Kamen Rider influence than Power Ranger influence, for what that's worth.
Duly noted. And that is a great way to end it, honestly, with a little tease of what's to come.
I love it.
Well, Kyle, thank you so much for sitting down with me. Thank you for letting me take a little bit more of your time than we initially budgeted, but this has been a lot of fun.
Oh, my pleasure, man. And thank you so much for all of your coverage of not only Radiant Black, but the Massiverse, and, the way that you spotlight books that you love is, we need more of that in the industry. So can't thank you enough, and so glad the stuff that we are making is resonating for you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it, man. Have a great rest of your day.
All right, you too.